Universal Education by the Oberlin Heritage Center. Since 1833, Oberlin, Ohio has been a community dedicated to education. The founders believed education could uplift and reshape the Western frontier. At this time in history, it was rare for anyone who was not a wealthy white man to attend college. While most of the nation's colleges outright banned women or people of color from attending, Oberlin was one of the few exceptions. Universal education is the idea that all people deserve access to education. From its beginning, Oberlin College was the first coeducational college, with men and women studying together. Just 2 years later, it became the first college to admit all students regardless of race. This drew individuals worldwide to Oberlin, chasing the promise of an education and a better life for themselves and their families. However, most Americans did not support the idea of universal education, and some actively worked against it. Even in Oberlin, where the schools were integrated and coeducational, many students encountered racism and discrimination. While these students faced hardships and barriers to success, they pushed the system forward and fought to protect the right to education for marginalized groups who came after them, including beyond Oberlin. Early educational reform. In the early 1800s, many Protestant Christians, such as Oberlin's founders, were heavily involved in reforming the American education system. They believed being able to read, namely reading the Bible, created a more moral society. European pastor John Frederick Oberlin, after whom the town was named, conducted experiments in public education from his town in France in the 1700s. He created infant schools, an early version of kindergarten, and was one of the first to use taxes to fund public schools and employ women as school teachers. These reforms spread across Europe and North America. Oberlin co-founder John J. Shippard, inspired by these reforms, guided the development of the school system in Oberlin. Oberlin Public Education System. Originally, the Oberlin Institute was supposed to provide education to all ages. However, it was quickly decided that the public schools would be separate from the college. The first schoolhouse in Oberlin was built in 1836, now referred to as the Little Red Schoolhouse. Oberlin schools were integrated from the start, disobeying the Ohio Black Laws of 1807 that restricted the rights of free Black people, including denying Black children access to a public education. One of the people who studied in Oberlin was Sarah Margrew Kinson. Margrew, as she was originally known, came from the Mendi region of West Africa and was sold into slavery as a child. In 1839, she and other captive Africans were on board the ship La Amistad when they staged a mutiny, took control of the ship, and were eventually arrested by the United States government. Following a rare legal victory for abolitionists, or people who stood against slavery, the captives were released from jail and returned to Africa. In 1846, supporters paid for Margrew, now going by the name Sarah Kinson, to return to the States and attend school in Oberlin. In 1849, Sarah went back to Africa to work as a teacher, even founding her own mission school in the Mendi region. This first schoolhouse serves as a reminder of Oberlin's early commitment to universal education through the promotion of high-quality, integrated public education for every child. Co-education and higher learning for women. While Oberlin College has always been coeducational, women were not allowed to enroll in the degree-granting course, called the classical course. They instead took the ladies' course, which largely shared the same curriculum, but granted diplomas rather than degrees. Women's education was important to the founders, not out of a sense of feminism or equality, but because they believed that education made women better Christians, wives, and mothers. In 1837, 4 women petitioned the college for admission to the classical course. Their names were Mary Hosford, Elizabeth Smith Prawl, Caroline Mary Rudd, and Mary Fletcher Kellogg, also known as the First Four. Hosford, Prahl, and Rudd successfully graduated in 1841 as the first women in the country to earn bachelor's degrees. Throughout their studies, they dealt with discrimination and restrictions on what they were allowed to do both inside and outside of the classroom, including their public behavior, dress, travel, and interactions with their male classmates. They were not allowed to join co-ed clubs or socialize in any manner deemed potentially scandalous. Women were forbidden from public speaking in front of men, including participating in debates or reading their own essays at graduation. Despite these restrictions and obstacles, the first four opened the doors for future women to pursue the degree course. Upon her graduation, Mary Hosford remarked, "Sometimes I feel like weeping tears of joy over those dear young ladies who are now making their way through the same path that we have trod, peaceful and unmolested." Despite this advancement, women were still discouraged from entering the degree program for decades. Oberlin took pains to reinforce gender roles to ensure the college would not masculinize them or turn them away from what they saw as their true Christian duties as wives and mothers. Female graduates of Oberlin were generally expected to become either teachers or the wives of ministers and missionaries, an expectation based in biblical teachings and sexist assumptions about women's roles in early 1800s society. It took decades for Oberlin to allow women into the school of religion, called the Theological Seminary, or even be allowed to deliver speeches in public. And this progress only happened after relentless petitions and defiance by female students who advocated for themselves and their own education, such as Lucy Stone and Antoinette Brown Blackwell. Integrated education. In the 1830s, the United States was divided into slave states and free states, with Ohio being free. The entire system of slavery, or forcing free labor for someone else's financial gain, was defended using the racist mindset that people of African descent were less smart and inferior to white people. Even in the northern states, where African Americans were free, those in power enforced a racial hierarchy to keep Black people down. Oberlin would disprove these racist assumptions. When Oberlin was founded, there were only 6 Black men in the entire country recorded to have graduated college. Although not the first to admit Black students, Oberlin became the first college to have an open enrollment policy for all races. This change was inspired by the arrival of abolitionist students from the Lane Seminary in Cincinnati. In February 1834, these students held an 18-day debate about slavery. This upset the school's leadership, which consisted of Cincinnati businessmen who benefited financially from slavery in nearby Kentucky. The board voted to censor the students and specifically forbade any discussion of slavery. Most of the students and one board member, Asa Mahan, left in protest, earning the name the Lane Rebels. John J. Shippard, seeing an opportunity to help grow the Oberlin Institute, approached the Lane Rebels and invited them to come to Oberlin. The students agreed to come, but only if the college allowed them to freely participate in abolitionist activities, including founding an anti-slavery society. Additionally, and most importantly, Oberlin had to allow for the admission of all students regardless of race. One of the Lane Rebels, James Bradley, was a formerly enslaved Black man, and the students refused to transfer to Oberlin if it would not accept all of them, including Bradley. This deal had the backing of wealthy New York abolitionists, Arthur and Lewis Tappan. This last demand was by far the most controversial. Many white Northerners did not like slavery, yet most did not believe in racial equality. Some people were afraid of racial intermixing in general, and the possibility of mixed-race marriages were disapproved of even in places like Oberlin. When the Lane Rebels made their demands, a survey was given to the students of Oberlin College. The results showed that 55% of the students were against the admission of Black students. The Oberlin Board of Trustees met on January 1st, 1835, and approved all of the Lane Rebels' demands except for one, choosing to decide on the admission of students of color at a later date. In response, Shippard wrote a passionate letter to the board, appealing to the idea of universal education and calling out the trustees who supported abolition but not educational opportunities. After intense public debate, on February 10, 1835, the board voted 5-4 to allow the admission of all students regardless of race. While students of color had full access to an education for the first time, many, especially women of color, still faced segregation, discrimination, and conflict with some other students, particularly after the Civil War. But the students endured, knowing that receiving an education was the gateway to opportunities. Teacher training. Training teachers, as well as ministers and missionaries, was a primary focus for Oberlin. In the first few decades, the college offered a variety of programs. The preparatory department, similar to a high school, the degree-granting classical course, the certificate-granting ladies course, the theological seminary and teachers' seminary for graduate students, and, by 1865, the Conservatory of Music. Those educated in Oberlin would go on to spread the values of godly living, universal education, and abolitionism to other schools and the next generation. Oberlin specifically focused on providing teachers to communities in need, whether that be in the newly settled towns of the Pioneer West or Black communities that had previously been denied access to education. One such example is Fanny Jackson Coppin, formerly enslaved herself, who in 1863 became the first African-American student teacher at Oberlin's preparatory department and went on to become an early pioneer in Black education. Other notable figures. Now we will tell the stories of some of the other Oberlin pioneers of universal education who fought against discrimination to receive their own education and dedicated their lives to helping others do the same. George Boyer Vachon was the first African American to earn a degree from the college. Vachon's abolitionist father, John Vachon, was determined that his son would be educated, believing it a key instrument in helping free African Americans from slavery, and proving that, quote, "the intellectual capacity of the Black man is equal to that of the white." When George turned 16, his father sent him to Oberlin College. During his time there, Vachon taught in local schools between college terms. In 1844, George earned a bachelor's degree from Oberlin. He graduated at the top of his class and went on to study law. In 1847, he applied to take the bar exam to become a lawyer in Pennsylvania, but was denied because of his race. George persisted, moving to New York and becoming the first Black lawyer in the state. In addition to his legal career, George was an educator, serving as a teacher and principal at free Black schools. In 1867, George moved to Washington, D.C., where he became the first Black professor at Howard University and worked as a counselor for the United States Supreme Court. The first African American woman to complete a 4-year course at Oberlin was Lucy Stanton Day Sessions, who pushed the boundaries of what was expected of Black and female students at the college. She was extremely active during her time at Oberlin, becoming the first Black woman elected president of the Ladies' Literary Society. Lucy completed the ladies' course in 1850, and at her graduation, read her speech entitled "A Plea for the Oppressed," protesting the newly passed Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and urging her female peers to action. Her words were said to be so powerful that the crowd, despite Oberlin's long-held tradition of not allowing applause, clapped for her. Lucy worked as a teacher, author, and activist, and was the first Black woman in the country to publish a work of fiction. However, shortly after the birth of her daughter, her husband William Day abandoned her. Because women did not have much legal power at the time, it took 14 years for Lucy to be officially granted a divorce. Her status as a single mother left her a social outcast. This, coupled with racist mindsets, caused her to be rejected from many jobs. However, Lucy continued to pursue her passion for providing education to those in need. Following the Civil War, she joined the Freedmen's Aid Society and traveled to Georgia and Mississippi to teach newly emancipated communities. As the first female professor at Oberlin, Adelia Field Johnston spent her career advocating for female students in higher education and ensuring they received the support that she was denied. When Adelia enrolled at Oberlin in 1852 at the age of 15, she dreamed of getting a degree. However, she was convinced by her mother and Mary Ann Dascombe, the principal of the ladies' department, to take the ladies' course instead. Throughout her life, she expressed regret that she did not choose the degree track, stating, "If I had known what I was to do in life, I should never have consented to be overruled in the matter of my education." After graduating, Adelia worked as a teacher and later a principal. In 1870, she was offered the position of principal of the women's department at Oberlin College. Adelia only accepted the job on the condition that she be allowed to teach, but the college only allowed her to instruct women. However, her class became so popular that male students petitioned to be allowed in. Adelia soon began teaching core classes in the college curriculum as the first female faculty member at Oberlin. In 1901, she was the first woman elected to the Board of Trustees for the college. Mary Jane Patterson became the first African-American woman in the nation to earn a bachelor's degree. Despite facing discrimination and major obstacles in her career, she went on to become an incredibly important figure in the blossoming network of Black education in areas outside of Oberlin. The Patterson family moved to Oberlin from North Carolina in 1856 for educational opportunities. Mary Jane graduated from Oberlin in 1862 in the midst of the Civil War and moved to Washington, D.C. to teach at the Preparatory High School for Colored Youth, later known as the M Street School, which was the first public high school for Black students in America. She was promoted to principal in 1871, but was asked to step down after 1 year in favor of a man, as the school thought it was improper for such an institute to be run by a woman. However, 1 year later, Mary Jane was reappointed principal. Under her administration, the school more than tripled in enrollment, and a department for the training of teachers was added. But in 1884, Mary Jane was again asked to step down in favor of a man. Despite the demotion, she continued to teach at the M Street School until her death in 1894. She was also involved in social justice efforts, working with career training schools for Black women, homes for the elderly and injured, and helped create teacher training and kindergarten programs across the country. Mary Church Terrell was a trailblazer who gained national fame due to her educational advocacy and activism for women's rights and civil rights. She attended public school in Oberlin and then enrolled in the college, graduating with her bachelor's degree in 1884. Not stopping there, Mary then became the first Black woman in America to earn a master's degree, graduating from Oberlin's Teacher Seminary in 1888. During her college years, she was elected class poet and served as an editor of the Oberlin Review newspaper. She taught at the M Street School with Mary Jane Patterson and was eventually appointed superintendent of the school in 1895. That year, she also became the country's first Black woman to serve on a state board of education. Mary was a famous civil rights advocate. She persisted against racism and segregation in the majority white women's suffrage movement, which fought to get women the right to vote. Her programs celebrating famous African Americans would become the inspiration for Black History Month, and in 1949, at the age of 85, she led the fight to desegregate restaurants in the DC area. Terrell's life and legacy are still remembered today for her pioneering work to expand education and civil rights to all members of society. Students came from all over the world to take advantage of Oberlin's commitment to universal education, and some made changes on the international level. John Longalibelele Dube was born in 1871 in the Zulu region of Natal in South Africa. His father, Reverend James Dube, was a pastor, and from an early age, John was enrolled at a Christian mission school. One of the missionaries, Reverend William Cullen Wilcox, was an Oberlin graduate who recognized John's potential. At the age of 16, John traveled with Wilcox to America and enrolled at the Oberlin Preparatory Department. In 1893, John returned to South Africa and began working as a teacher. 1 year later, he and his wife founded a new mission school. This school differed from the other Christian schools in that it encouraged literacy in the students' native languages as well as English. In 1901, John founded the Zulu Christian Industrial School, later Ulange High School, the first formal educational institution in the nation founded by a native African. At the time, European settlers oppressed the native Africans and created a system of intense legal discrimination called apartheid. John believed in the need to combine Western education with local customs and traditions in order to uplift Africans. He also placed a special emphasis on the education of girls, something discouraged in many local traditions. Ulange High School specialized in education of labor, the trades, and economic development, inspired by Oberlin's own focus on learning and labor. In 1912, John was a founder and the first president of the South African Native National Congress, later the African National Congress, a political organization that fought against the apartheid system. After apartheid ended and the first general election was held in 1994, Nelson Mandela decided to cast his vote at Ulange High School to honor John L. Dube and his legacy of uplifting Black Africans. While the founding ideology of Oberlin included the principles of universal education, it was ultimately the students who passed through Oberlin who were committed to change and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. These students broke barriers, served as role models for the next generation, and dedicated their lives to making the world a better place for all.